As Ramadan drew to a close, there was no peace in the Israeli-Palestinian quarters.
We in Gaza and all of Palestine do not feel the joy of this Eid because of this devastating aggression carried out by the occupation forces on Gaza and all of Palestine in general.
Israel's airstrikes on the Gaza Strip have been relentless. Palestinian militants have fired rockets back in kind as confusion reigns over what is actually happening on the ground. Israeli defence announcing ground forces had entered Gaza territory before denying it 2 hours later.
Israel is not going to go into Gaza itself. The only reason for Israeli foot soldiers to go into Gaza would be if the Hamas had abducted an Israeli soldier or Israeli civilian. Otherwise, I don't see that happening.
The week of escalating violence was sparked by a series of events, including a court case that could see Palestinian families forcibly removed from their East Jerusalem homes in favour of Israeli settlers. Simmering tensions boiled over when Israeli police attacked Israeli Palestinians as they prayed at Al-Aqsa Mosque. As of today, more than 100 residents of Gaza have been killed, including 27 children. The Israeli death toll sits at 7. Terrified civilians caught in the conflict as Israeli and Palestinian mobs clash on the streets.
We continue striking Hamas while defending our citizens. It will take more time, but with great firmness in offence as well as defence, we will achieve our goal of bringing back calm to the State of Israel.
With many fearing the worst is yet to come, Egypt, Qatar and the US are calling for de-escalation and offering to help broker peace.
As always, we'd urge all those involved to exercise restraint, to restore calm and so people can live peacefully and to avoid any unilateral actions that might destabilise peace.
But it's doubtful these words will sway anyone caught in the heat of battle.
In Israel, what we're seeing is a string of retired generals telling the public that the only way that this will not recur in the future is if the Israeli army can destroy as much as Hamas's capability as possible. And so the public opinion and the politicians at the moment are following suit and are not in a hurry to stop the fighting.
So what will it take for the violence to cease? And is a peaceful resolution possible?
Reporter Sarah Coates is currently in Tel Aviv and joins us now. Sarah, there's confusing messaging from Israel.
I think we've just lost the link.
We have just lost our link.
Talking about the issue, though, I tell you what, it feels intractable, doesn't it? I mean, Israel clearly is disproportionate, though, in terms of what the Palestinians do back, whether you have this chicken or the egg argument about who starts things.
Yeah.
Well, it's the disproportionate nature of the whole conflict that is the really awful thing about it. That what happens is that you know that in the conflict, maybe for every Israeli that is killed, probably 50, 60, 70 Palestinians are going to be killed. And they're ordinary Palestinians caught in the fact that you've got the extremists, Hamas extremists, who are firing the rockets, massive reaction from Israel, and that's the end result of it all.
Yeah, now I believe we've got Sarah back. Sarah, you're currently in Tel Aviv and there's confusing messaging from Israel. Have ground troops crossed into Gaza or not?
Yes, good evening, Lisa. No, they haven't at this stage. The IDF spokesperson's unit put out a tweet last night, which wasn't very clear. It was actually misinterpreted by a lot of international media. What actually happened last night is that the IDF conducted a number of major airstrikes on Gaza. We know that about 160 Israeli warplanes attacked this underground military infrastructure that is there in Gaza. It's known as the Metro, really trying to take out that infrastructure, which Hamas uses to smuggle fighters and weapons. Now, a lot of the international media reaction there was focusing on these ground troops, thinking that they have been amassing there on the border, but thinking that they'd actually entered into Gaza. But what had actually happened is some of these Hamas militants, these cells, were firing at the Israeli troops on the Israeli side, and the Israeli side was firing back at these cells. But no one has entered there as yet.
Sarah, Israel has called up 7,000 reservists. On the face of it, that's rather alarming. What does that suggest?
Yeah, it really is. It really says that, Israel is prepared to attack in Gaza if it gets to that. We know that the decision is yet to be approved by cabinet, but this is really a situation that neither side want. If Israel does indeed attack within Gaza, it would have terrible consequences for the civilian population there in the Gaza Strip. They have already been ravaged by coronavirus. And now Hamas is sort of basically hanging them out to dry. As we know, it's an extremely densely populated area. 2 million people, more than 2 million people rather, in this tiny little enclave. And Israel really doesn't have much to achieve with a ground operation in Gaza. It has really carried out these huge aerial strikes, which have caused so much damage there in the Strip that it will take years to rebuild at this stage anyway.
How have the people you've spoken to been feeling?
Look, it's been a pretty crazy time. I live in Tel Aviv, but I travel around the country a fair bit for my job. For the last 4 days, people, especially in the south, have spent the majority of their time in these rocket shelters. They've been under order by the IDF not to leave their homes and not to leave the shelter. They have about 15 seconds from when these red alert sirens ring out to get to shelter. And unfortunately, on the Israeli side, the death toll actually has risen overnight to 9 people now, with a little boy, not last night, but the night before. He was actually inside his shelter and the rocket penetrated through the shelter. So that just goes to show that these shelters, are not 100% safe. So, yeah, people, are pretty worried, and people are really concerned of an all-out escalation and where exactly this may go.
Well, Sarah, I know you're about to head right down to the conflict, so please take care and thanks so much for speaking with us.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa.
Now, just have a look at this latest statement from Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu. He says, "I said that we will exact a very heavy price from Hamas. We're doing this and we will continue to do so. The last word has not been said and this operation will continue as long as necessary." Barry, after a statement like that, it's just impossible to see where this is going to end.
Look, it's always a worry when political leaders are involved in these kind of situations and they're under pressure. They're under political pressure in their own countries, and that's what we're seeing here, the worst possible result.
With so much content online, it's sometimes hard to keep up with it all. And let's face it, who has the time? The Project YouTube has you covered with the stories that matter. Hit subscribe for a daily list of the news that you need to know.